So first of all, good evening, everyone. So today we are in session number 9, which will be on systems and processes. Well, out of the 7 S's, I like many of them. I like shared values, I like strategy, but systems and processes is something very close to my heart. So let's see how that goes. After this, we will have a very important session, the next one, which would be on shared values. And then finally, we will sort of do a round on leadership, connect everything, and then combine, enrich, and excel, which will be like the last session of Excel. Okay. We'll get started here. This didactic might take a tad longer than normal. It might take about 45 minutes, I think. Let's see how long it takes. So this is where we are, session number 9, followed by 3 more that will bring closure to Excel. Now in Netflix, I was watching this program, which is called Explained. I think there's the name of the program. There is a small episode on various things. One of the episodes was what makes sound music? When do we hear it as environmental sound? When do we hear it as music? Let's say we have water dripping, drop by drop by drop by drop. We start hearing it as sound. And at some point in time, it starts sounding like music. What is the point of inflection when one hears it as sound and when is it music? So the general conclusion which came in that particular program, and then I looked up a couple of other places, and then what happens is, well, form, pitch, timbre, all important. The main difference between sound and music is a repetitive beat, a rhythm. Okay. Something which happens repeatedly all through the piece of music. The rhythm is what differentiates sound and music. Now, if you look at, just carry this one word, rhythm, we can see in our animal kingdom plenty of places where there is rhythm. Whether it is with migrations, which happen like clockwork. There are birds which migrate for like 3 months and then come to another place, and they go exactly to the same place. Or we look at, let's say, wildebeest birthing. Wildebeest, they can smell rain, apparently. That's what our guide in Africa told us. They can smell rain a week before the rains come in. And what wildebeest do is they hold on to their babies all the way till it rains, because as soon as it rains, then the fresh grass starts growing, and the calves will be finding it easy to have those because they can easily digest it. And wildebeest, you will have thousands of wildebeest birthing at the same time. And it happens like clockwork. It happens like rhythm. Even if you look at ourselves, there are plenty of rhythms which is there within our body. We have rhythms which are circadian rhythm. We have the heartbeat rhythm. There are plenty of rhythms which are there inside us as well. Now, this kind of a rhythm in an organization is called a process. Okay, so that's all that is there to a process. A process is nothing but a repetitive beat. It's nothing but the rhythm of the organization. If an organization has to function smoothly, then we need to have very strong systems and processes so that things happen as if it's like a large piece of music. Things happen like clockwork. Things happen repetitively. Now, we have seen in the past, this is a picture, I'm sure we have seen it at least 10 times, where we talk about the higher center or the willful mind, which is the more deliberate, conscious part of our brain. And then we have the lower center, which is more the automatic, habitual mind. Right? And if you look at where a process will fall, a process is something like this. Systems and processes are routine habits of an organization which happen in a repetitive manner, almost automatically. But the question is it a paradox? A system means we felt that there should be some deliberate action, there should be consciously, we should be doing something, but it happens almost automatically. Okay, like a rhythm, it happens automatically. Now the paradox gets resolved like this. The automatic part is when we follow and implement a system. Anytime we have to follow a system, we don't need to think and decide for ourselves whether this is the right path, this is the right thing to do or not. The design, however, as to what is the system is a deliberate higher center activity, right? So if you have to take a traffic light as an example, where do we put a traffic light? How long will it stay in red? How long will it stay in green? All of that is a deliberate higher center activity. How do we coordinate various traffic lights, which happens in some of the bigger cities, where you hit one green and you will get green, 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 green if the traffic is flowing at roughly 45 to 50 kilometers an hour. Now that part is a deliberate higher center activity. Once that is there, the implementer doesn't really have to think about what do I do when it is red? Okay, what do I do when it is green? What happens at 4:30? I see a red light and there is nobody coming in the perpendicular road, nobody in front, nobody at the back. It's 4:30 in the morning. There is no one on the road. What do I do? You just follow, right? That's how systems work. We don't use our brain while we are doing that. Use our brain in the sense we don't deliberately use our higher center and cognize. We just follow and flow with whatever system which was properly designed at an earlier point in time using the higher center. Right. Let's go back to the McKinsey 7S model. And the 7S model is that there are three hard S's: strategy, structure, and systems. These are the three hard S's. We had a case which neatly gave us an opportunity to look into the softer S's, which are skills and style. We looked at it last time. We already have looked at strategy and structure, which leaves us with systems and shared value, really. Okay. These are the three hard S's. Just as a quick refresh, what is strategic intent and what is strategy? Strategic is a bit like a goal. Okay, it's not quite a goal. It has to have some more elements. It has to have a gulp factor, or it has to be what we call a big, hairy, audacious goal. It is a goal, but it has to be big, hairy, audacious goal. It cannot be a realistic goal because it has been proven through research that you're always better off setting unrealistic goal and coming back at 60% performance than setting easy goals and crossing that to 110%. In absolute sense, the 60% is usually higher than 110%. The second part about strategic intent is we don't think of it incrementally from where we are. We imagine, as leaders, we imagine the future. We develop a point of view of the future. A good question we can develop a point of view of the future today is about what will education look like in 5 years' time. As school leaders, we need to be able to imagine that, or we have to be able to construct it. Right? I'm not saying we will be right about it, but we still are obligated to imagine that. Will it be completely offline? Will it be completely online and online will become the main mode? Or will it be blended? To what extent will it be blended? What are the subjects which lend themselves more to online? So what will the future look like? How will history get taught in future? How will math get taught in future? How will education reach the rural areas in future? So in 5 years' time, what will the overall landscape, what will the tapestry of education look like? And if you're able to make that imagination, then we place ourselves in that imaginative space and say, this is what I want to be within that. And that is what we call as the point of arrival. And where I am today as an organization is my point of departure. And once I know my point of departure and know my point of arrival, then the rest of the things is fairly not straightforward. It falls within a certain structure. And that as to how we will go there from a point of departure to point of arrival is really the strategy. And strategy, like we said, is not like a catch-all statement. A catch-all statement, one example we gave was when we go on the highways, there'll be these restaurants which will say North South Chinese Chettinad, veg and non-veg restaurant, bar attached family restaurant, or whatever else it is. It's just a bit of a catch-all. It doesn't mean anything. Okay, so all of us have mission and vision statements and strategies which go for like 40, 50 words, and they don't really mean anything at all, because we just want to be getting everything done, and that is not possible when it comes to goals and strategies. We have to be precise and specific, because each one of those things costs money, each one of them costs resources, and each one of them costs time. And therefore, we need to prioritize and say, what is that I will get and what are the things I don't want to get? It's okay. I would love to get those, but I can't get it because that's not my priority. They have to be precise, measurable, and possibly with some amount of timelines. So this is the intellectual stuff, right? Imagining the future, defining where we want to be in the future, and knowing what's my point of departure and point of arrival, and how will I reach there, is all meeting room stuff. There is no implementation yet. The next step is we have to assemble the resources. Assembling resources, figuring out who will do what, who will report into what kind of a structure, which are the teams which will take up which kind of task, is all about structure. How do various activities get directed to come to a goal is structure. All good structures, roles will be very clearly defined. There will never be a confusion in a good structure as to whose job is it? Is it mine or is it yours? I thought it was yours, you thought it was mine. None of that happens. And the other important thing is, what I do, you don't. What you do, I don't. Okay, we are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. That doesn't mean there are no interdependency. There'll be plenty of interdependencies, but I don't do what you do, and the other way around. The third aspect of a good structure is decision-making has to go as low as it can. If decision-making continues to get concentrated at the top, then there is only so much anybody can do. They will either not be able to prioritize it, or they might make decisions which are of inferior quality than what they can potentially make if they had infinite time, and nobody has that. Right? So decision-making in a good structure has to be pushed down as low as possible. And a couple of other points: don't make a structure very bulky. Okay, don't fit in too many things and too many arrows flowing in your structure, and ensure that your span of control is no more than 8 direct reports. Over the last weekend, I was speaking to Lali Auntie in terms of, she was mentioning to me, saying that 8 direct reports or something is what you mentioned. That's practically unfeasible when it comes to a school, because typically a coordinator will have something like 20, 22 people reporting into that, 18 to 20 people reporting into a structure like that. You know what, we can have 18 to 20 people. The fact of matter is we cannot get to know the 18 to 20 people. We can even have 100 people, but we'll never be able to get to know them, because then we will end up paying in different ways, because we will not be able to spend time with them. And therefore, we cannot understand the aspirations of the people who are within our structure. We cannot understand their key strengths, and therefore, what is the role in which they will fit in better than their existing role. We will not be able to evaluate whether they can take up some more responsibility than what they are doing now. Our promotions and incentives and increments and everything else will basically get standardized, right? So, well, 18 teachers are reporting into me. All of them will get about 10% increment. A few of them will get 12, few of them will get 8. We can't really make a clear distinction and differentiation between different people. And we will not be able to, give them the comfort as to, when they have a problem, they can go to someone, and that doesn't happen. They don't know where to go, and people will leave. So it will reflect in attrition, it will reflect in motivation, it will reflect in job satisfaction, because the roles and competencies are not well aligned. All of these will happen if we have more than 7 or 8 direct reports. 8 is like max, okay? 4 or 5 will be ideal. That's as far as strategic intent, strategy, and structure is concerned. Now then, what is systems and processes? Think of it like a game of football, okay? Where what we have to do, which is score a goal, is really the strategic intent. How we plan the game as to, are we going to attack from the left flank? Or are we going to go from the right? Are we going from the center? Or which way are we going to attack is really the strategy. Our defense, offense, center field, goalkeeper, all of that is really the structure. And the roles are very clearly defined. A goalkeeper will go up to a certain point, and after that, he retracts, he comes back. He might be the best forward in the team, but if the role of that person is a goalkeeper, the person comes back because they have to defend the goal, and we have to trust that the rest of the team will go ahead and do whatever is expected of them to do. And that doing is really the systems and processes. That execution, that doing, that day-to-day rhythm, that repetition, that heartbeat of an organization is really systems and processes. Okay. We are very close to the World T20 World Cup. So I picked up a quote by one of India's famous captains, and somebody who has won 2 World Cups. And this is what he had to talk about as process. So keeping a goal is very critically important, but the point is, we don't keep looking at the results. Okay, we don't have to keep looking at where we have to go. We have a fair idea where we want to go. Then we just have to focus on the process. If we keep focusing on the process, the results will follow. If we follow the rhythm, the results will follow. Okay, so whenever this point about systems have come in, there have been some discussions I've had with my teams when I was working in an organization, in terms of, we have a problem and immediately we'll say, this is the fix we can have for that particular problem. Okay, so a few people are walking in late into an organization, and then we put a register in the front counter and say, everybody will enter what time they enter and what time do they leave the organization. Does it solve the problem? They could still be coming in to the organization and whiling away time, or they can come in, note down their name, and then go back out. There is no way of checking all those things. So now these are things which are like patchwork. This is not a system. Okay, so every little problem, every little symptom, and creating a fix for it is not a system. A system is completely different. So I wanted to talk about what is systems thinking. Okay, there are 2 forms of thinking, very broadly speaking. One of them is called analysis. The other one is called synthesis. Analysis is where you take the whole, you break down the whole into parts. We then understand each one of those parts, and we understand the whole as a sum total of the parts. We take something, we break it down. So you think of it like a car. We break it down. We understand the engine. We understand the tire. We understand the chassis and the steering wheel and the transmission system. We understand the carburetor. And that's it. We understand the air conditioner, whatever else it is. And then we understand the car using that. Now, that form of thinking is also called reductionism, where you take a whole, break it into small parts, understand the parts. Once we have a very good understanding of the parts, we sum it all up and say the total is therefore equal to this. The trouble with that is there are many systems where the sum of the parts don't add up to the whole, or sometimes some of the parts add up to more than the whole, or the whole is sometimes more than the sum of parts, sometimes the whole is less than the sum of parts. That is because of how the interlinkages work within those parts. If any of you is a math teacher, then you will know how vector addition works. If you have something pulling in a certain direction and something pulling the same thing in a slightly different angle in a different direction, the sum of those two is lesser than any one of the individual ones. Okay, so the interlinkages, the correlations, the correlationship between one part and the other is not taken into account when we use a reductionist approach. So reductionist approach is a fairly effective way to go about analyzing a system if interlinkages in a certain system is low. Okay, because it's a simpler form of understanding, and it's also pretty rigorous in terms of understanding. But the problem is whenever there are lots of interlinkages in a system, okay, it doesn't quite work. A reductionist way of developing a system gives rise to what is called local optima. Okay, there's a very beautiful book if you want to understand systems in general, systems and processes. The name of the book is called The Goal. It's written by a guy called Eliyahu Goldratt. Eliyahu Goldratt has pretty much written it like a novel, where he talks about saying a good system is where you don't keep creating local optima, because the total optimal solution is not equal to the sum total of the local optima. A great example of that is when we drive on the roads. Each one of us is honking and overtaking the car in front of us. Okay, some vehicle in front of us, everybody honks, overtakes, honks, overtakes, honks, overtakes. Are we as a group, as a collective of all the people who are going from point A to point B, are we doing it as a collective, as a society in the most efficient and the most optimal manner? The answer to that is no. Because each one of us try to maximize our returns. Each one of us is trying to minimize the time we take to reach the destination. And what that does is it doesn't create an overall optimal solution. This kind of a problem is a problem called prisoner's dilemma. A prisoner's dilemma very quickly is like this. Two burglars or thieves have been caught. They've been put in two different rooms. They don't know what the other person is talking. They know each other. They did it together, the crime. And they've been put in two different rooms. And each one of them is asked, okay, if you did it, okay, and if you didn't do it, did the other person do it? Okay. The thing is, if both of you say that you are innocent and you don't know what the other person is saying, if both of you say you're innocent, you both get 1 year jail. And that's it, you go off. If you say that you are innocent and the other person is the culprit, then you go free and the other person gets 5 years in jail. And similarly, the other person says he's innocent and you're the culprit, then you get 5 years of jail. And if both of you say the other person is the culprit, then you both get 3 years of jail. This is a very, very interesting sort of a problem. There's plenty of work which has been done on this problem. We won't have time to go into that exceptionally interesting problem. And now this problem says that while it is the perfect solution for the system, which is for both of them collectively to have the least amount of prison time, is to say that I didn't do it, neither did the other guy do it, is the right answer to give in this particular situation. I'm not getting into the morals in terms of did they actually do it or anything like that. It's a mathematical construct. Yeah. So the best is to say that, but more often than not, people say that I am innocent and the other person is a culprit, and the other person also says that, and therefore we get into a place where both of us get 3 years of jail term. And that is exactly what happens when we overtake and cross the, when we overtake in traffic, all of us want to overtake, all of us want to minimize the time we take. And in the process, we create so much of chaos on the roads that overall as a system, we are reaching our destinations much slower, burning a lot more fuel and spending a lot more time on the roads. The other form of thinking is a thinking which is called synthesis. Okay. If you want to use one of the more recent buzzwords, it's called holistic thinking. Okay. So synthesis is the way of thinking where we understand the components, we understand the connectivity which is there between the components, and then we try and understand the whole through the components. Yes, Jarna.
Ramesh sir, I'm so sorry. I could not get that difference between optimal solution and optimal solution. If you can just.
Oh, no. Both are optimal only. Yeah. So, yeah. So what I meant was not a total optimum solution for the whole system. Something like that is what I have to write. I will sort of re-articulate it. So I didn't mean to say it as optima and optimum as two different things. What I meant was that if you, I, all of us belong to a certain system, and each one of us try to maximize our returns, okay, which is maximizing your returns is what? When we are in, when we are going to our place of work, we get out of home and then we get into a vehicle, a two-wheeler car, whatever it is, we get into it and then we start honking and overtaking and honking and overtaking and honking and overtaking. And everybody else is also honking and overtaking and honking and overtaking and goes on like that. If we take all the 100 of us who are on the road at a given point in time and say, okay, these are 100 people who started at point A and landed at point B. Each one of them tried to maximize their returns. In the sense, what is returns in this case? I want to be spending the least amount of time to get to my destination on the road, least amount of time. And if you add up the time they actually spent on the road, it is much more than what they would have otherwise achieved by just sticking behind another vehicle and allowing all the lane discipline to be followed, all the traffic signals to be followed, all the traffic rules to be followed. We do it slowly, deliberately, and everything else. We will still be able to reach our destination as a system, as a group. We'll be able to reach much faster than what we will do if all of us try to maximize our locally, as in each one of us individually try to maximize our returns. What happens, the system as a whole doesn't get to its most optimal solution. Did I make sense or did I confuse you even further?
Clear, absolutely, thank you.
Okay, thank you. The other form of thinking is called synthesis. Synthesis, the more recent buzzword we hear is what is called holistic, where you understand the components and the interconnectivity of all the components. So this is particularly required when we think of things which are highly interconnected. So one thing is, let's say, if you take the field of medical science, okay, so today we go to a doctor, there's so much specialization which is in that particular field. You go to a doctor and the doctor only looks at your knee because you have your problem which is in your knee. And somebody looks at only your, something to do with digestion, and somebody else will only look at your heart, and somebody else looks at this. But collectively, are we looking at the body-mind complex as a whole? Are we treating the human being like Hippocrates said, that treat the human who has the disease, not the disease the human being has? Okay. Now, when you get into very, very large specialization, we get too analytical about it, where we think of it as parts and we think the whole is equal to the sum of parts. Whereas in a human body, there's a lot of interconnectivity, and therefore what we need as a solution is to understand how do the constituent elements work and interrelate, and how does this system flow into a higher system? How do those interconnections work? And then develop a system or develop a solution. Now, developing a solution which is a more holistic in nature is a lot more difficult. Okay, because plenty of time needs to be spent in terms of designing a system. If you look at the European rail system, right? When you look at an European rail system, what is fascinating is the train system not only works inside every country. All of us think only it works only in Switzerland. It works in every single country, by the way, in Europe. It works, and not just that, the train system of one country has interdependencies with the train system of another country. People go seamlessly through all the countries because they're the same visa. Okay, it's treated like that. And we will be able to jump 5 or 6 trains without ever spending more than 7 or 8 minutes in any platform. Ever. Okay, so you can just see how seamless that rhythm has to be for us to be able to change 5 trains without ever having to spend more than 5 or 7 minutes in a platform in any place. And these are going across countries. So the trick to a good designer is design it once, design it well, and just repeat from there onwards. Okay, Jugaad is the exact opposite of that. Jugaad is just about creating fixes. Every little thing, we develop a system which is like no thought has gone into it. We have a system in place. We start following the system and realize it's not quite working out, and we improvise as we go along. Okay. Now, should we improvise? Should we not improvise? Is something I want to talk about in a little bit of time. So let's talk about what is an effective system. An effective system is something which has to simplify our lives. If a system doesn't simplify our task, it's not a good system. Second, it should be able to save time and save money. Okay, it's the same thing. Time is money. So it should be able to save time and save money. Third thing is we should have a much better control of the situation. Or if you're producing a product, we should be having a superior quality of the product which is coming out by following a certain system. All good systems will have all these 3. Your bullseye is right in the middle. What a good system really has to do is we should be able to slow down so that we can move faster. If you're rushing, if you are like busily moving here and there, then chances are that we don't have a system. Okay. If an organization is way too busy in terms of its movement and somebody else is coming, ad hocism and everything else, okay, then chances are that we don't seem to have a system. Third thing is, if a system is effective, it's like a rhythm, it's automatic, which means it releases our higher center for more important things. There's a lot more time we can think in terms of the people who are reporting into us. We can spend a lot more time in terms of our values. We can spend a lot more time with the teachers. We can spend a lot more time with the parents. We can do all kinds of things if we have that rhythm which is set in place. Okay. The only big thing about a system is spend all the time you want to while designing. But then once you have designed and said, this is a system, don't think. Okay, just execute it and keep executing and keep executing it. After that, there is no more thinking. Oh, this might be a better idea. It's okay. We'll take it up in the next design. You can write it on a piece of paper, and then we can take it up in the next design meeting. Till that point in time, we are not going to discuss that because it's just routine work which we are going to do and repetitively execute. So I'm going to talk about a few qualities of an effective system. The first thing is it has to be simple. It has to simplify our life. Okay. There is no better thing which simplifies our system in a kitchen than this, a spice box. We don't have to open 10 different bottles. It simplifies our job. Second, it's very easy to execute. All I have to do is take this and put it next to me. And I pretty much have everything which I want inside that particular box, anything dry spice I need inside that box till the time I finish my cooking. And third, it's easy to keep the system going, right? All of this is there in a simple system. So this is an effective system. If a system complicates our job, very often we come up with an idea and say that let's have this. I mean, from tomorrow we have to implement it. We write a circular, send it to everybody, paste it in some 20 different notice boards inside our school or wherever it is. And then after that, it becomes, some kind of a rule. The point is, many of those things just complicate lives for everyone. It doesn't simplify, it just complicates life. And then people will get frustrated with it. People will push back, and then we get frustrated that nobody is following the system. The fact of the matter is, it's not the problem with the people who are following or with you. It is just that we haven't understood what a good system is. And a good system is, it has to simplify. If we are not able to answer all these three questions in the affirmative, which is, does it simplify? Yes. Does it save time and money? Yes. Does it give us better quality and better control? Yes. Okay, that's probably a good system. Chances are it's a good system. Okay, and that's a good system. Every 24 hours, that fellow comes up. Okay, the sun. Qualities of an effective system is also consistency. Okay, consistency is, for a certain stimulus, what is our response? We know what is behavioral consistency. We sometimes come back and say, last time I said this, but you were okay with that, but this time I'm saying, and you're getting unnecessarily upset with it. Behavioral consistency is our response pretty much the same quantum and the same direction for a certain amount of stimuli? Okay, that kind of consistency of a system is basically that kind of consistency for an organization is a system. Okay, a good system is this ISO 9000. Very often people think ISO 9000 is a quality standard. It's not. ISO 9000 is simply this. Okay, I just do what I have documented, and I document everything which I do. That's all that is there to ISO 9000. ISO 9000 doesn't say whether your product is superior, worse, whether your children are having better academic record, worse academic records. If you get an ISO 9000, will your education institution be better? No, but you will churn out the same thing consistently year on year on year on year. If your pass mark is pass percentage is 80% or 83%, or your academic record is like this, entry into higher studies is like that. If we follow the same system, do what we document and document what we do, we will get consistently the same performance. The second important quality of an effective system is adherence. Okay. Adherence to a system has to be taken very, very seriously. Okay. And even we have to, even as leaders, it's very important that leaders follow the system 100%. If we make an exception, okay, like this small thing, like a register, right? I mean, when we come into a office, so the person who's, handling the register will say, no, it's okay, ma'am, you can go ahead and all that. No, there is no question of you can go ahead. There is no discretion which is allowed at every level. We will sign that system. Okay, if that is the system, which might or might not be a very good system. If that is the system, then adherence has to be 100%. And the penalty for non-adherence has to be strong. It is okay to make mistakes and fail in things where judgment was involved and where we were asked to do something and make our judgment and go about doing that, and it didn't work out. That's fine. Okay, failure is very much a part of success, as we have seen in growth mindset. But not following a system is not growth mindset. Thinking about it every time and giving our 2 bits every time when a system has to be followed is not growth mindset. It is just indiscipline, and that has to be strongly penalized. Sometimes people always come back and tell you there is a very good reason. They'll be able to tell you why that system shouldn't have been followed at that point in time. You know what? Till such time we design a new system, this is the system and we will follow it. Now, one example, I just love this example. I'm going to give you 2 examples about a country where I stayed in for about 9 years, and I admire them for their systems. Okay, this is watering public plants. So one of the days when I was coming out of office in Singapore, this is Singapore. So when I was coming out of my office and I saw this guy who was watering a public plant. They water all the public plants, and this guy was watering the public plants. But what was strange was it was raining. I was wondering, why is this guy watering the plant when it's pouring? Okay, we are all standing and that guy is holding an umbrella and he's watering the plants. The point here is his job is that he will water the plants at a certain point in time and put so much of water for each of the plants and keep doing that. Now, there is no discretion which is embedded into it saying that you don't have to water at times when it is raining. And therefore, the person just follows. Okay, now think about it. Let's say the person doesn't water. It's probably the right thing to do, not to waste water and not water on a day when it has been pouring. The next day, if it starts drizzling, what does the person do? Does he water the plant? Does not water the plant? Third day, he might hear it on the radio that there's going to be heavy rainfall in about half an hour's time. Does he decide at that point in time? So the trick in some of these things is that he will water till such time he's been told not to. Okay, which brings us to the next part, which is discretion. Okay, people who implement might not know all the interlinkages. So as far as they're concerned, they will adhere to a system and not keep asking questions as to, or use our head at that point in time, just follow that. The second thing is about discretion. Now, discretion always sits 1 or 2 levels above the implementation level of a system, which means it's more at a design level, is where discretion is embedded into a system. Because if you don't have discretionary powers, okay, if everyone has discretionary powers, it will just lead to chaos. But if nobody has discretionary powers, it will just become a bureaucratic, rigid system. So what we have to do is really be able to design a system where you adhere, like that watering thing. You adhere to the system in terms of you water the plant even if it is raining. If it is raining, keep an umbrella, continue to water the plants. Rain is giving you water, fair enough, that's fine. But unless you're told on the radio at that point in time saying that all people in this particular district within Singapore, you can discontinue watering, that's discretion. At that point in time, you can stop watering. Okay, I'll tell you this tiny story. And before that, so like I said, discretion and adherence happens at different levels, and therefore structure and systems, if they don't properly mesh into each other, for every system, what level has the discretionary call has to be very clearly laid out. Who can say that do not follow the system or suspend following the system for a certain period of time? That discretion has to be very clearly embedded and very clearly known to people, so that again, we don't have this confusion of who's going to take the discretion. Otherwise, we will land up with that MEES problem, which is mutually exclusive, non-mutually exclusive, and collectively exhaustive problem we'll get into. Okay, I wanted to tell you this tiny story. So I was a permanent resident, and so was my wife at that point in time in Singapore. And my son was born. This was the year 2000. And we applied for his passport. We got the passport, the Indian passport. And we planned a small holiday when he was 9 months old to go to Thailand. Okay, we land up in this immigration queue, which pretty much looks like this picture on the left side. We land up in the immigration, and it was our turn. I show my passport. The guy looks at it, my permanent resident card, and he stamps it, gives it to me. Same with my wife. And then for my kid, he says, "Where is this re-entry permit? Where is this permanent resident?" I said, "Oh God, I got his passport and everything done. I completely forgot. I somehow automatically assumed if I'm a permanent resident and so is my wife, my son is also a permanent resident, but it's not the case. And he can't leave the country, or if he leaves the country, he can't come back in. And he's all of 9 months old. And we've already prepaid all the money for the holiday." Okay. And then this guy says, "Just go and meet the guy at the in another counter." I went and met the guy. And the guy looks at me and says, who's the one who's got no re-entry permit? I said, this boy. I was holding him in my hand and he was all of 9 months. I said, this boy, he needs a re-entry. He doesn't have a re-entry permit. He looks at me, takes his passport, puts a re-entry stamp and says, you can go, come back in 14 days and apply for your permanent resident. That's it. All of 30 seconds. Okay. He didn't put me through any torture. Okay, and say this is wrong or that is wrong, or you have to come back, you have to do it tomorrow, or there is a penalty, there is a fine. None of those things. That guy had discretion. Okay, so a system where there is strong adherence and good quality discretion makes it truly sexy as a system. Okay, it has to have both those elements. The last couple of things, which is one is about the quality of an effective system. An effective system always will invest right in what is called the critical path. Critical path is a topic you might want to go and read upon. Critical path is basically those paths and passages which are choke points. Okay, I like to use kitchen examples more often than otherwise. If I'm making sambar, I have to put the dal for boil first. If I don't do that, then the rest of it is not relevant. I can squeeze the tamarind, I can put the vegetables, I can put the masala, salt, chili, curry patta, everything, and then boil it and keep it all ready. Dal is not ready, the sambar cannot happen. So dal has to go first. It's about the sequencing and it's about which is the path. If it breaks, then the whole system is going to fail. That path is called the critical path. Okay, there is usually one path in any system, which is the critical path. Now, what do you do with critical path? What you do is you identify the critical path and invest in those choke points. Investing in choke points is basically about building redundancies. Okay. If you go to a passport office, there are these 3 sets of counters, right? A, B, and C. Some of you would have seen. We will all go through A in about 7 minutes. Then we go through B in another 5. And then we all get stuck in C. The whole crowd gets stuck in C. Okay, C, therefore, is the critical path. All we have to do is we are doing A and B too fast. Take some of the people from A, some of the people from B, and invest in C. Or put more people in C. Then the whole thing will go seamlessly. It's like a road, which is an 8-lane traffic, which narrows down to 2 lanes and broadens back again to 8 lanes. That's it. That particular point is your critical path. That particular place is going to choke the traffic no matter what. Okay. It's to be able to identify those critical paths in our organization and invest through redundancies. And finally, it is about plan, do, check, act. Okay. Once we plan, do, check, act, there is a loop which goes. All systems, when we call somebody or somebody calls, okay, or we give an instruction to someone, that person will say, I will get it done, ma'am, by Monday, I will get it done. Okay. And we say, okay, Monday, fine, fair enough, go ahead and do that. Now, how do we know, but it's done by Monday? How does it loop back? Whether the activity is done or not. How does it loop into them? When they commit to something, does it go into the diary? How does it come back? Is their diary and yours connected? Is their scheduler and yours connected? How does it come back? That whole looping, that whole closure has to be embedded in a system. A non-looping system simply means there'll be commitments and it will just trade. Just to get over a certain situation, somebody will say, oh, this one, okay, this will be done by another 4 days. Oh, 4 days, very good, very good, very good. That's all. Then it will stray. After that, we have no idea. Okay, what happens? So all good systems have to loop back till that particular task is completed. Okay, and finally, this element of check and balance in terms of who is doing and who is controlling have to be, it's called a maker checker process, or sometimes it's called a check and balance, checks and balances in a system, which is essentially about who does. And you will see it in banks all the time. Somebody is assigning authority and somebody else is the one who is giving out the cash. That's for better control, because one of the elements of a good system is better quality and control. Okay, that's it. As far as operational excellence is concerned, we simplify or save time. If it's a good system, save time or money. It has to gain control, systems thinking. These are all the various elements of it. Now I have to say a couple of words about IT. We talked about systems and processes, and we haven't mentioned one word about what we normally take as a system, which is information technology, computers, and some data processing, and all of those things, and reports and analysis and all those kinds of things. Systems is not about computers and information technology. Okay, we have seen many systems here. Okay, if you come back home and hang your key in a certain place and you keep doing that every day, that's a system. Only that in a complex organization, that system is a, I can understand it through analysis, through reductionism, I can understand it. But if you have to understand it through synthesis, through system thinking, this is not a very good example for that. When there's a lot of data recording and computation, computers are a lot faster and smarter than us when it comes to computing and data processing. That is where we bring in a computer. Okay, and remember, computers are all about garbage in and garbage out. If a system design is bad, there's only so much a computer can do, and no computer can solve our problem if we haven't thought of a system. Okay, if a folder system, which we have inside our computer as an individual, is bad, then the computer can't find the file for you. Okay, and finally, my last word on systems and processes is, do not, over precisely design a system if this is what you're going to do. Do not measure with a vernier caliper if you are finally going to mark it with a chalk and cut with an axe. All right. If you're going to cut with an axe, your measurement has to be broad according to what you're going to cut with. So when you design a system, understand how the implementation is going to happen, and then design the elements within the system. Otherwise, you're going to waste resources in terms of measuring with a vernier caliper if you're going to finally cut it with an axe. Like this morning, I need to get an RT-PCR done because I'm traveling out. This morning, I called up the hospital and I got into that usual thing, press 1 for talking to this one and press 2 for this. And I pressed some number and it said, your queue number is 4. Your waiting time is 1 minute and 3 seconds. Believe it or not, 1 minute and 3 seconds. I waited for about 5 minutes and nobody came. I switched it off. Okay, so don't get into this thing of measuring with a vernier caliper and saying things like 1 minute and 3 seconds if your final delivery is going to be 5 minutes and nobody even comes on the phone at the end of 5 minutes. No one is coming at the end of 5 minutes. At least the least we can say at the beginning itself is saying we are busy at the moment. We don't know when we are coming back, but we will come back to you one of these, in the next few minutes. Okay, so measuring with a vernier caliper, marking with a chalk, and cutting. If you're going to cut with an axe, don't measure with a vernier caliper in the first place. Over designing a system does not only cost money when you're designing a system, even at the time of implementation. Everybody is measuring that precise thing with the vernier caliper. People are taking very clear recording. They are recording this data, this much marks by this student and that much mark by this student, and this one addition, average, mean, median, mode, everything else. And finally, we say, okay, we should have a special class for this group of students. If this is what we are going to do, why measure it so precisely? So align it with how your decision making is going to be, which is cutting with the axe, and then decide what are the things you want to measure and how precisely you want to measure all of those things. Yeah? That's as far as excellence, systems and processes excellence is concerned. Like I said, I've taken a lot longer because it's a topic I realized will take a bit more time, but I guess it's okay. We still have plenty of time for the